So far we've looked at Nehemiah, you were listening, and his superpower was, thank you, prayer. He had a really effective prayer life, didn't he? He was also a leader who was brave, influential, tactical, and he was focused on the task in hand. Who was next? Ruth. Well done. Ruth, she was loyal, she was brave, she was patient, she was really humble, she was faithful, and she was virtuous, full of love. And then last week we looked at Naomi. Well done. You've been listening. I'm impressed. So Naomi went from lament to praise. Thank you. My husband was listening. That's always good. Naomi went from lament to praise. She was caring. She was gracious, considerate. She was also really vulnerable, wasn't she? And I believe she had an attractive godliness, a good judge of character, mentor, and spiritual mother to Ruth. So this week, our superhero is Abigail. Fabulous. You got 10 points already. Well done. Not many people speak about Abigail. I don't think I've ever heard a message on Abigail. I can't ever remember hearing one. And I've been going to church since I was very little. Maybe I heard one when I was very little. But I can't ever, anybody here remember? Yeah, just a couple of nods. So there we go. See? I've just said, some people might be thinking, who is Abigail? There we are. Some people might be thinking, who is Abigail? They've not heard a message on Abigail. So there we go. Unlike our last three superhero characters, or our first two, actually, unlike our first two superhero characters, Abigail doesn't have her own book. There's not a whole book dedicated to her. She's in one chapter in 1 Samuel, chapter 25, tells us the story of Abigail. So let's take some time to learn about Abigail. And because this is Summer Superheroes, we will watch a video about the story of Abigail. Thank you, Kayla.
In the Bible, there was a rich man named Nabal who was known for being rude. Nabal had a large flock of sheep and goats, and a wife named Abigail. Unlike Nabal, Abigail was known for being sweet.
Hi.
Not far from where Nabal and Abigail lived, King David and his men were camping. David needed some supplies, so he gathered some of his men to send to Nabal's house. He told them to greet Nabal with kind words, and Nabal should return their kindness. So the men went to Nabal, greeted him with nice words, and asked him for some supplies. But Nabal was nasty. Go away! He shouted insults at them and told them to leave. The men returned to David and told him the things that Nabal had said. David was furious. He told his men to grab their swords so they could get even with Nabal. Meanwhile, back at Nabal's farm, Abigail heard how poorly Nabal treated David's men.
Oh, no.
She knew her husband's bad attitude could mean trouble for them, so she gathered food and supplies and loaded them up on donkeys. David and his men stormed through the desert, ready to get revenge on Nabal. Suddenly, they saw someone approaching. It was Abigail. Abigail bowed down to King David and begged him not to hurt Nabal. She asked David to stop and think before he acted out of his anger. David took a deep breath and thanked God for sending Abigail to calm him down. David accepted Abigail's gift of supplies and went home, instead of doing something he might regret later on. Because Abigail asked him to think about forgiveness, David chose peace instead of anger.
There we go. That is the story of Abigail. Abigail was known for being sweet. That's what it said on the video. But she was really intelligent, and she was a very beautiful woman. Through wisdom, courage, and skilled negotiation, Abigail saved her household from certain destruction. Her husband Nabal teaches us how not to behave. Nabal means fool, and boy, did he live up to the meaning of his name. He was foolish, bad-tempered, and just really unfriendly. The festival or the celebration of the shearing of the sheep, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Was a time of lavish hospitality. There was usually more than enough to go around. All the tables would be generously filled with lots of lovely supplies for everyone. David's request of Nabal was one that was fair in the culture of the day. Along with his 600 warriors, David had not only protected Nabal's livestock throughout the year, but they had made sure that his property and his servants were also protected. For them, joining in the feast would have been, with just all the other workers, would have been quite normal. David made his request through some of his men in a peaceful manner. Good health to you, they were to say. They spoke politely as they asked for favor. They spoke with love and respect. But Nabal's response to them was just rude. Who does he think he is? Nabal showed that what a really ungenerous man he really was, and how ill-tempered, ill-mannered that he was with his nasty response to David's men. And so that his insult, the way he spoke to him, was just a great insult to David. David was so angry, so angry. He was usually a man of peace. But when insulted by Nabal, David just got mad. He saw red. In a fit of rage, he vowed to get revenge. Now, my boys will tell you that growing up, they heard from me over and over and over again not to get revenge on their brothers or anybody else that hurt them or upset them, because sometimes revenge can have worse consequences to you than the original problem. So they were probably fed up hearing me saying it. And there's a nod, so yes. As soon as Abigail hears what Nabal's response to David's men was, she acted swiftly. She took action quickly. When it looked like tragedy would unfold, Abigail's quick action changes things and prevents bloodshed. It says in 1 Samuel 25:18 and 19 that Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 200 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 sheaths. I don't know how to pronounce that. But what it is it's probably about 60 pounds or 27 kilograms of roasted grain. 100 cakes of raisins and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and then loaded them onto the donkey and told her servants to go ahead. I will follow you. Now that's some feast. That's quite a lot of food. So it is. I'm glad you agree. She then went to David, and powerfully she showed her humility, asking him to forgive her husband's reaction to David's request. She was humble, even though it was not her fault, demonstrating something really powerful for us all to learn. Even though something is not our fault, sometimes humility can be the best course of action. It's an attitude check for us all. Some people come across our paths and change the course of our lives forever. And Abigail was one such woman who changed the course of David's life forever. Abigail had no idea how David would respond, but she chose to do the right thing. She looked beyond herself and acted with humility and compassion. She sought to make peace, bravely stepping forward and taking the blame for her husband's actions, something that she didn't do. She humbly asked for forgiveness on behalf of her husband and her whole household. God spoke clearly to David through Abigail as she pointed out how wrong it would be to seek revenge, and she challenged David to think about forgiveness. Abigail saw the bigger picture. She pointed out David's situation and the plan God had for his life, reminding him that he was part of something bigger. Sometimes we need to ask for God's help to remind us that we are part of something bigger, part of God's plan, and ask God to help us see the bigger picture. Abigail was loyal to God and showed respect for David when it would have been easy for her to give up and turn away. She was an incredibly wise woman with leadership skills that we can all learn from. God was her champion, and God worked through Abigail to save the lives of her household and to save David from making wrong choices too. And like Abigail, we need to be humble and kind in how we speak to others around us. This is one small chapter with some big life-changing lessons. Because of Abigail's quick action and humbleness, David chose peace instead of anger. God delivered Abigail from David's wrath and the wrath of her husband, because when she told him the next day what had happened, he had a stroke, and some days later he died. She was so incredibly brave, telling Nabal what she had done, because he probably would have killed her. Abigail had asked David, "Remember me," when she heard, and when David heard what had happened to Nabal, he remembered her, and he sent for her, and David married Abigail in the end. God was her deliverer. Our words and our actions are powerful. We need to be honest with ourselves before God and question ourselves. How is our reactions to things? How do we respond to other people? Are we quick to respond like Nabal, or are we quick to respond like Abigail? Quite possibly, we might be more like David, who may initially react out of revenge and want to, are really open to others coming around beside us, pointing out maybe a wiser way to handle things, reminding us to choose forgiveness. So who do we have around about us like Abigail was there for David? Because of Jesus, we can choose forgiveness when it seems impossible. Like Abigail, Jesus brings a way that is much better. He brings peace and he brings hope. Like Abigail taking the blame and standing in the gap, she stood in the gap, so Jesus stood in the gap for you and for me. He took the punishment for all of our wrongs when he died and when he rose again, as we've been singing about today. And if you have not met Jesus and you don't understand what I'm talking about, I'd encourage you, come and speak to me, come and speak to one of the team, because we would love to introduce you to Jesus. Abigail foreshadows Jesus. And I'd really encourage you to read the chapter for yourselves, to study Abigail much more in more detail, because I've got so much out of reading about Abigail and studying about this story and the parallels of Jesus and Abigail. It really is very special. Her example points us to Jesus. What's our example pointing people to? Is our example pointing people to Jesus like Abigail's does? So throughout this last few weeks, we've had some bookmarks for you, just reminding you of what we've been learning together. So this week's bookmark is from Colossians chapter 4, 5, and 6. Here it is here. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That reminder to be wise in how we speak to other people, just like Abigail. Lord, help us to be wise in our actions, so that we can point others to Jesus. Amen.